You're watching the Chucktown Wind Report Extended Weekday Outlook from Monday, October the 5th, and I'm going to go ahead and carry this on through Friday, October the 9th. Okay, so we have had quite an event over the last several days with plenty of rain, enough for 3 months or more, has fallen over the state of South Carolina. It's been a historic event on many levels, and we hope to never see something like that again. The one positive that we did see from this low pressure system that is off of our shore now is, as it started as a trough, a negatively tilted trough over here just east of the Midwest states, it did deepen far enough to develop a low pressure and upper level low pressure system that was able to scoot down here and deflect Hurricane Joaquin, which came from the Bahamas, and was able to fish storm out to the Atlantic. So that is one plus that we got from this rain event. However, there are parts of the state that are suffering quite a bit in Columbia and the mid-state, where bridges have fallen out and there's been quite a bit of damage. So our thoughts go out to them with all of the damages done across the state and the flooding that we've seen. So the only silver lining is that we did avoid a possible Category 3 to Category 5 hurricane along our coastline, and this was one of the reasons why. So the current situation with this low pressure system is that it is occluding off the shore. When I say occluding, it means this little pink line right here represents occluding on a weather map. It means that cold fronts are overtaking warm fronts in unison. So we see this trough, they're all following line. It's fanning out below. It's a very typical situation where the cold fronts overtake the warm fronts. And basically what this means is this is an upper level low still, is that it is in the process of removing the warm air from the core of it. So that means it's only going to be cold air around the core of this low pressure system. So I've already had a couple of questions tonight asking me about whether or not this may develop into something tropical, extratropical or subtropical with cold core systems, possibly, but when it's occluding like this, it's already on its way out. That's called what we call cyclogenesis, when we see occluding fronts like this off the coastline, typical of northeasterly events. But this one right here is going to lose steam as the cool air starts to wrap around the center, and there isn't enough spin up top to keep it going. Plus the path of Joaquin has sort of sapped some of the energy out of the area, but this area right here will just continue to fizzle out as it slowly drifts off to the northeast. This area will continue along the coastline as a trough, and we may see central low pressure, maybe a closed low here and there develop, and keep some of this chance of showers and rain activity just along our shoreline just for the next couple of days or so. But I think that we're in the process of drying out significantly from what we've seen. I don't think we're going to see any more flood warnings unless we get any localized thunderstorms that cause any accumulation over certain areas that do not need any more. The ground is already saturated enough. So with that said, let's talk about what the winds are going to do for the coastline. So we have this upper ridge of high pressure here that's developed over the Great Lakes area, and these Canadian highs this time of the year, they're starting to come along one after the other, and this was the last one over here, and you can barely see it, it's off the map. That's the one that gave us our last northerly wind. Here's our new one that's driving a northerly wind down, and what this is doing is allowing the gradient to tighten along the backside of this boundary. So we're still seeing high winds up in the Outer Banks, southeast North Carolina, and even up into Maryland, Virginia, where this pressure gradient is being enhanced all along the coastline. And so we're seeing elevated winds to the open areas. Now when you talk about northerly winds, these are offshores for these states, and typically you would see these winds really ramp up in rivers, harbors, anywhere where it has a chance to settle down to the surface without any surface friction from land, and that really gets those winds going. But for Outer Banks and these open areas, boy, they're really getting hammered. They've had quite a bit of beach erosion going on and some coastal tidal surging. So we continue to be in a coastal advisory because of our high tides that keep coming up over 7 feet, and that's in unison with a waning moon that was a supermoon recently, and then all the additional water on the ocean and some of these driving winds down the coastline have all been components of our flooding event on top of the rain that we've had. So we'll continue to see these northerlies through tomorrow morning, probably see some mid to upper teens, and then fading out through the day. I do not expect the gradient to remain tightened for very long as this low pressure fizzles out slowly and the warm air gets sucked out of it. So we'll see less thunderstorming, maybe a few sprinkles or mists here and there, but I don't think we're going to see very much accumulation. We could see a little bit of a pulse here and there. These northerly winds possibly meet upper teens or even low 20s at times in their gusts. But for the most part, I think our major storm is over for the rest of the week, and we don't anticipate seeing it come back. So behind this high pressure ridge, as this continues to move off to the east, these northerlies will they'll fizzle out. We'll see a lightening of winds on Wednesday, probably at or below 10 knots. We'll keep the northerly flow going. It's going to be very light. We're not going to see very much warm air in the area to help develop any kind of backdoor sea breezing. In fact, the air is going to stay relatively cool for the week. We may see some warm up on Thursday, but I think in between this high pressure ridge coming behind this boundary, this high pressure ridge, there's another large area of high pressure building down from Canada behind this frontal boundary here. Now this front is already occluding in this area, so it's going to continue to move in this direction, and this high pressure is going to probably break through the boundary and spill down another round of northerlies down into the southeast region, and then possibly Thursday into Friday. I was seeing a tighter gradient earlier where we would start to see some enhanced northeast to east-northeast winds, but at this point it's really too hard to tell what's going to happen Thursday and Friday. We could see an intensified gradient with some moderate winds, maybe 14 to 18 knots develop, but it's just too early to tell. I think we can stay safe on 11 to 15 knots tops, and then leave a possibility of 14 to 18 knots to develop Thursday, and then maybe fade out Friday and possibly return Saturday. So it's kind of iffy right now. I would say for the next 2 to 3 days, let's look at winds lightening to at or below 10 knots at some point for late tomorrow afternoon into Wednesday. So we get into a very relaxed pattern, a much needed break from the intense rains that we've gotten and the intense driving winds with it, and some of the tides may start to back down by half a foot or more. So we're looking pretty good so far for the middle of the week. Okay, so with that said, let's take a quick look at the atmospheric loop, and here is your upper low that is off the coastline, and you can see most of the rains and showers, the residual rains and showers associated with it, are still kind of remaining closer to the core around the center and remaining off the shoreline. Now we'll probably still see some residual showers, maybe a sprinkle or two along the coastline, but most of that energy is pretty much gone, and this is becoming a cold core low out in the ocean, especially since Joaquin churned up those waters. The surface waters are already a little bit cooler. Alright, if we're looking at our 248 nautical mile range on a radar, we see a few light showers that were coming down the coast. Looks like there's some scatter on the radar here, so don't pay any attention to this area around the plus symbol. But we see some of these, you can see most of the rains, moderate rains and showers still wrapping around this low out off the coastline. If we go a little bit closer in on our radar and get 124 nautical miles, you can see some of these coming down the coast and they're fizzling out already. So very weak system going on at this point, and I don't anticipate anything significant for rainfall accumulations in the next 24 hours. Okay, let's look at the rainfall totals. Now we see some very, very intense numbers here, and we can thank those that are in the CocoRaHS community, CocoRaHS.org. These guys are great because they are a league of citizens that have all joined together to give rain observations through their rain gauges and provide that information to the National Weather Service and NOAA for what they do and for their collective data. So it's very, very important that they work together with them, and that's why these models, this actual data map is very grainy, is because they're trying to collect as much data from observation points, which are human beings, and the weather stations in the area to develop a schematic for exactly what happened. So with that many people and this many observations, it makes the data that much more accurate. So we're looking at 20 plus inches across the Charleston, Dorchester, Berkeley County areas, even down into Colleton a little bit. Just north of Charleston, seeing from Mount Pleasant all the way to the north through Ondaw, Eugene, out to Kingstree and up through Columbia, and even parts north towards Florence. We saw, 16 to 20 inches and 20 inches plus. I think Mount Pleasant had about 26 inches. So if we look at the storm rainfall totals, here's some of the large totals that we have. Mount Pleasant saw 26.88 inches. Wando, South Carolina, 18.47. Cainhoy, 25.50. So it really, these areas are all close together. Mount Pleasant, Cainhoy, and Wando. If you look at it on an overhead map, they're all kind of close together in the vicinity of each other. But you can see the difference, what difference makes in distance. So from Wando to Mount Pleasant, you had almost a 10-inch difference. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about here with these CocoRaHS observations, is that it's really important because Otherwise, we would assume that Mount Pleasant got 18 or somewhere in the middle between 18 and 26. So now we have exact numbers. 26.88 inches is the top number recorded in this rain event, and that's over 2 feet of rain. We're talking 4.4 trillion gallons of water that fell from this system. It's just super impressive. Okay, here's the video that I put out earlier, the Mosaic 4-day loop from October 1st to October the 5th, and I'm going to increase the screen size on this and let you see how impressive this rain event is. Let me make sure we got on HD. See if I can go up higher in the quality, or I'll just leave it here. So you can see the rain train going through off the coastline, and here it is. So we see all this rain just streaming in. That was Thursday. Here goes Friday, just running right into the coastline. You see that rain train tilt more to the northwest into Saturday and Sunday, and then ultimately to the east Sunday late afternoon and into the evening, and then it tilts over. So you can see how that water just spouted into the coastline over and over and over. Here's another look at what the National Weather Service, U.S. National Weather Service, calls a fire hose. And basically this is just an atmospheric river of moisture that streamed in, and it was all sort of tied in with Joaquin to the south with outflow, and everything going on with it was just super, super impressive. So let's take a look at this, and I want to blow the screen up on this as well. This is super, super impressive. You can see how that water's just spouting into the coastline, and like I said, 4.4 trillion gallons of water. And you see that upper low wrap around off into the water and get more moisture wrapped around the core. So that's why you can clearly see the upper level low. When it was inland over here over Alabama, Georgia, these states, you couldn't really get a good idea as it was pulling away from the trough because there was so much dry air wrapped around it from being over land. But as soon as you see it over the water, you can kind of get an idea of what that looked like over there and how that moisture was streaming up from the Gulf and then ultimately up the Atlantic, up the Florida coast, and then up from Joaquin, as both were feeding off of each other, and it was just an impressive event. Okay. All right. Let's look at our local winds. Right now we're seeing 18 knots. Fort Sumter Front Range Light. It's a little bit jumpy, 18 knots with gusts up to 21 knots currently. I see a couple of spikes here up to about 22 knots. So we're not quite out of the woods yet with those winds. I think the winds will stay along like that into the morning. They will slowly fade. If we look at our models, let me see if I can load our models without it hanging up for any amount of time. We might have a lot of people on the server right now using this product for various purposes, but if we can get this to load within a couple of seconds, there we go. All right, so here we go for tomorrow morning. And the more models we load, the more crunch this data gets here, but you can clearly see a lot of these models keep the winds up in the mid to upper teens and then slowly fade out into the morning. And then as we get into tomorrow afternoon, it looks like some of these models even drop down to 10 knots or below 10 knots. So a fairly northerly wind regime in place for tomorrow, steady. Maybe see some variances between north-northwest and north-northeast, but for the most part, offshore winds lowered on a lower trend all the way through the day, and into Wednesday we see it lean out more to the northeast and then to the east, and into Thursday we see easterly winds and weak flows. So that will depend on the high pressure to the north. If we get a stronger high pressure, we could see those winds come up to stronger levels as the gradient tightens with that offshore troughing. So the models may not be picking up on that right now because it is so far out. We're talking 4 days. Okay, to the beaches we have 10 knots. And that's land shadowed, and we see the surface roughness behind the sensor prevents this from picking up any open winds like it would in the harbor. If we look over here, West Ashley, James Island, at our hurricane sensor, this is weather flow, Datascope weather flow that I'm using right now. And so this is a very good go-to tool. We can see the weather station here. That is in West Ashley. It's kind of over near California Dreaming, if any of you are familiar with that area. That's our station right there. And this is the data that comes through on it. It updates every 5 minutes. So all of our stations in yellow and green are weather flow stations that update every 5 minutes, with the blue line being the average, the red line being the gusts, the green line being the lulls. And the lulls mean that no wind is ever consistent, and there's always a low end to the wind and there's a high end to the wind, and it draws a line in the middle for the blue. But really what's going on is the low to high wind. So the tighter those two are together, the more consistent it is, and the wider they are, the less consistent and the more bumpy with holes in it. Okay, so here we go with the tropics update. I'm going to take a quick look at Joaquin. It's heading off to the northeast. The winds are 85 miles per hour. Pressure down is up to 964 millibars. Expected to continue off to the northeast and possibly have some effects in Europe as a possible tropical storm if it can hold together. It's actually holding together pretty well in form. It's expected to remain in Category 1 and slowly weaken over time and remain a tropical storm for quite some time as it races off to the east-northeast, typically what we would call the hurricane graveyard. But this one seems to be strong enough with enough circulation around it that even with a cold core, it could remain as a subtropical or even extratropical storm as it makes its way into the European coast. Next area of disturbance, this is Invest 91L. Very low chance of development as it's entering into an unfavorable environment with upper level shear. And we'll get to that in just a second. This one is expected to keep drifting to the west and eventually over these islands. If it makes it there, I'm not really sure if it is. Right now it does not look very favorable. Models are not building it other than just a temporary low pressure that fizzles away as a remnant low. Here is Joaquin. This is kind of a new product, very cool, Vorticity Max. This is from CIMSS Sims, and they have figured out a way to exact on the center of rotation and circulation in storms and let that be the track guidance. So this is what Joaquin looks like with its intensities. Now earlier the intensities were on the eastern side and northeastern side, and we can see the banding, and some of the stronger storms have now shifted to the north and northwest side of the storm and even the western side. So as this continues to head off to the northeast, this is Bermuda down here. As it drifts away from Bermuda, they got swiped by this storm and they got some pretty powerful winds and waves and rain, but I think they did okay overall. But this is a nice little product. I thought it'd be neat to show you how it's going away from Bermuda. Okay, here is the storm track from Datascope, and here's the path that we see for where it's going to be going. Now, as we can see each day, like 24 hours, 48, 72, so on and so forth, the spread becomes more and more per day for this storm's track because it's really going to pick up speed across the Atlantic as these storms tend to do with pressure systems that sweep across the northern Atlantic. So as we get over here to Europe, we look at this final beat over here and we're looking at winds holding at 50 miles an hour. So it's a medium strength tropical storm by the time it gets over here. It could be subtropical, like I said, because it may take on more of a cold core characteristic that is characteristic of subtropical storms, where there's just no warm air anywhere to be wrapped around the center, but there's circulation and tighter banding going on around to keep it formed. So we might, United Kingdom, Ireland, France, they're all kind of game for this. They may start to take a look at what's going to happen with this storm because it may make some impacts over there. And that is as of Saturday, October 10th at 2 o'clock p.m. as it's nearing that area of the world. Okay, here's the Atlantic 5-day. Here's Invest 91L. Like I said, low percentage, 10% in the next 48 hours, 20% in the next 5 days. And you see its projected track from the National Hurricane Center heading to the west-northwest or even the northwest over time. Here's the visible image. And we just went into the nighttime, so some of the clear image went to more of an infrared. And the center of circulation I would put somewhere right about here. It's not very well organized, and a lot of the convective activity that you see flaring up here is staying to the north because of upper level shear. So this area of circulation is somewhere in this vicinity right here. It looks like you see some clouds kind of swirling, but there's no defined center of this storm just yet. Here's the rainbow loop, and again we see the center of circulation somewhere in this vicinity. There's no organization to the storms as the convective blobs remain off to the north and to the, actually you can see the upper level shear coming up across this way from the southwest to the northeast, and then some of the cloud tops peeling off to the north. Here's earth.nullschool.net. The surface map for this only shows a positive bend or positive trough, which is an upward bend of a trough. They're not even showing a surface center of low pressure at this point on their maps and models because there is none. There is nothing developed yet, and it really is only a positively tilted trough at this point. And as we go up to the 500 millibar level, this is 18,000 feet, we'll probably see what the easterly trades are doing with this at the mid-levels, and you'll see the track keeps this going west along this as a steering pattern across the leeward outward islands over here, and then eventually it could follow this path right on along the easterly trades and head to the west-northwest towards Cuba or Dominican Republic, where it would get sheared apart. Now, if it makes it that far, right now there is some roadblocks ahead of it. Number one, we have upper level shear ahead as we have an upper high to the north, and you see this wind coming from south to north. So there's your upper shear. We're already seeing that with the cloud tops blowing to the north with some of this south to north wind. It has to get through that, and then there's another round of upper high shear going on across these islands, so from the northeast to the southwest and then scooting on over to the west southwest. So this storm is likely not going to make it, and if you look over here to the United States, you can see that upper low off our coast and this giant high pressure ridge keeping the pressure behind it, keeping it wedging off the coastline, and as that air will help us to dry out tomorrow, so that this Gulf high, you can thank that for this drying process to start for us, and that's really good. The other portion for 91L, if we look at the particulates means the Saharan dust that's aloft coming off the Saharan coast, and this model actually is able to pick that up now, which is great because it's another set of data points with ingestion of data from different sources that we can use. And we can see on the back side of this storm there's still very light Saharan dust still being pulled into this storm at the mid-levels. Out here of the Cape Verde Islands, you see where it's heavier, moderate to heavy dusting going on, so we're not expecting any tropical systems to develop over the Cape Verde area either for the next 24 to 48 hours unless that relaxes and we get some rotation from storms moving off the coastline. Okay, here's the forecast track for 91L, and you see most of the model ensembles keep this drifting to the west-northwest and into the islands if it does make it that far. I seriously doubt we're going to have anything develop from this, and I think we should focus more on our neck of the woods and getting dried out. So once again, for our area tomorrow, I'll recap on winds for Chucktown Wind Report. We see north winds coming down mid to upper teens, fading out to low teens. Then we see a very weak system pattern as this trough expands over to the north. It might end up looking more like this as a east-west tilt, and then we get a very weak northerly wind, maybe east-northeast wind that is very relaxed as the gradient. There's no gradient, there's no strong core of high pressure up here. It's spread apart at a very moderate or weak level. 1020 millibars is all I'm expecting at the most until this next batch of high pressure wedges in behind this cold front. We won't know what's going on up there until that happens. So we could see a build Thursday, Friday, or not, depending on how strong this next high pressure is. And then if not, we may see it build finally down into the weekend where we could see some east-northeast winds build. So fairly light wind regime for this week. And that will do it for the Chucktown Wind Report. Thanks for watching.